The study of history is fundamentally the study of presence, the artifacts, the documents, the solidified evidence of lives lived.
And events transpired. We map the past by charting what remains. Yet sometimes, history presents us with an inverse challenge, a study defined entirely by what is missing. These are not merely gaps of ignorance, where information might eventually be recovered, but structural voids, perfect absences, where detailed records cease without explanation, leaving behind only the ghost of possibility and the cold, unyielding silence of the non-event. Our investigation traverses millennia and continents, examining 5 instances where entire narratives, massive populations, or organized forces simply stepped off the stage of existence, leaving no trace of their destination. These are the historical vanishments that defy the very concept of residue. Our journey begins on the raw, windswept shores of the far North Atlantic, a landscape defined by brutal stone and the ceaseless hammering of frigid water. Here stands the Point Delta Lighthouse, a towering granite sentinel built to withstand centuries of elemental fury. The year is 1901. This location, inherently isolated, became the stage for a haunting tableau of instantaneous abandonment. The 3-man crew, Hardwick, the principal keeper, and his 2 assistants, Wallace and O'Connell, had been maintaining the watch rotations with the mundane, disciplined routine required of their profession. Supplies were ample. The mechanisms of the colossal lamp were perfectly lubricated, and communications logs showed no distress. The relief vessel arrived 4 days past the scheduled handover, delayed by a sudden, vicious midwinter squall. As the ship nudged cautiously against the landing slip, the first signal was the lack of the customary welcoming light. The rotation should have been completed hours before. The air was thick with the smell of brine and old oil, punctuated only by the screech of gulls fighting the updraft. A landing party secured the dock. The massive, heavy outer door, designed to resist the power of the ocean, was securely bolted from the inside. They had to force entry. The interior of the lighthouse offered immediate, profound dissonance. Ascending the spiral staircase, the sound of their heavy boots echoed against the curved stone walls. But every other sound, the rattling of kettles, the rhythmic scraping of cleaning tools, the low murmur of men's voices, was absent. The operational area was spotless. The massive Fresnel lens, a monument of polished glass and brass, was meticulously cleaned and ready for its next ignition, showing the keepers had been preparing for the upcoming night cycle. The true chilling nature, however, lay in the living quarters below. The small communal mess hall was perfectly preserved, a snapshot of interrupted domesticity. On the heavy wooden table, the remains of the previous evening's supper sat undisturbed. Plates, heavy white ceramic, chipped only slightly at the edges, held remnants of cold, solidified mutton and potatoes. Water glasses, beaded with faint condensation from the temperature shift between the warm room and the frigid outdoor air, stood ready. Even the simple pewter cutlery lay precisely where it had been set down, not dropped in panic, but simply placed. The atmosphere was immaculate, entirely lacking the dust or signs of decay that even a few days of absence would impose. It was a perfect tableau of instantaneous, quiet abandonment. Forensic examination of the scene revealed no signs of struggle. No overturned furniture, no splinters, no scuff marks on the sanded wooden floorboards. The men's oilskins and boots were still hanging neatly on their pegs near the entrance, suggesting whatever compelled them to leave happened while they were indoors. Fully dressed in their lighter indoor clothing, and certainly not prepared to face the raging elements outside the thick granite walls. The investigation centered immediately on the logbook, the keeper's official daily account of weather, supplies, and maintenance. The logs were rigorously maintained, written in Hardwick's characteristic square hand up until the penultimate entry, detailing a routine check of the paraffin stores. The final entry, however, was dramatically different. It was short, written in a cramped, hurried script, the pen digging sharply into the thick paper, distinct from Hardwick's usual methodical flow. The ink was fresh, the paper still slightly tacky. Though the contents of this final note have been subject to endless speculation, the textual analysis confirms it was written under duress or extreme haste. Detailing not an external event, like a rogue wave or a vessel in distress, but something internal, related specifically to the station itself, a phenomenon of observation, rather than intrusion. The conclusion remains immutable. 3 experienced, disciplined men inside a fortified structure during routine operations, preparing to eat, vanished entirely. They left no broken glass, no blood, no footprints leading away from the structure, and no physical indication of an external force, capable of breaching the thick granite and consuming them without trace. The vast, cold ocean swallowed not 3 bodies, but 3 historical records, leaving behind only the perfect stillness of an empty, spotless room, where dinner plates remained waiting for owners who would never return. Our timeline shifts dramatically backward, spanning 3,000 years and moving thousands of miles southeast. We arrive at the sun-scorched plains of the Near East, where the heat is a physical weight pressed upon the cracked earth. We arrive at the enigma archaeologists refer to as the City of Cinders. This was not a small settlement. It was a vast, complex metropolis of the Late Bronze Age, peaking around 1200 BCE. It boasted an estimated population of 50,000 souls, a number rivaling the largest centers of its time. Archaeological surveys began over a century ago, revealing a sophisticated urban structure. The city walls were massive, constructed of fired brick and supporting large, complex gates. Within the perimeter lay meticulously planned residential districts, organized around wide thoroughfares and featuring multi-story dwellings. Digs unearthed specialized industrial zones, including extensive ceramic workshops filled with thousands of intact and fractured pots, storage jars, and tools. This indicates a high level of economic activity and specialized labor. The engineering ingenuity was clear in the remnants of an integrated water management system, fed by distant aquifers. Life in the City of Cinders was demonstrably rich and complex until approximately 1190 to 1180 BCE. This period was already marked by regional instability, climate shifts, and the phenomenon of the mysterious Sea Peoples. This tumultuous decade, often called the Bronze Age collapse, saw the destruction of many urban centers across the Mediterranean world. Destruction is usually evidenced by telltale layers of ash, defensive weaponry, mass graves, or the remains of hastily erected defenses. These are records of conquest or catastrophe preserved in the strata. But the City of Cinders shows none of this. The occupational strata, dark, rich soil mixed with organic waste, collapsed roofing materials, broken tools, and household debris, suddenly and cleanly terminates. Below this layer, there is the intense, vibrant record of daily life, the grinding stones, the tiny toys, the discarded animal bones. These remains tell the story of their diet. Directly above this rich historical text is what archaeologists call the inert layer. It is a thick, uniform blanket of undisturbed, sterile desert sand and fine, wind-driven dust. This lack of transition is the historical paradox. If the city had been violently conquered, there would be evidence of siege warfare, bodies left unburied, hastily buried valuables. Yet the structures show no widespread burn marks or structural failure due to violence. If the population had succumbed to a massive plague, there would be mass burial pits or bodies remaining where they fell.
But the City of Cinders yields few remains, and those few are associated with routine, earlier deaths. Most critically, if 50,000 people had organized a mass exodus, a managed migration to escape famine or threat, they would have left behind the logistics of their departure. Archaeologists would find abandoned travel supplies, evidence of the dismantling of heavy workshops, or the intentional, organized clearing of granaries. Instead, the evidence suggests that one day, the grinding stones were simply left resting on the hearths. The potters left their half-formed clay resting on their wheels. The 50,000 inhabitants simultaneously and quietly ceased to occupy the space. The structures themselves did not immediately collapse. They fell slowly, over decades. They were filled not with the residue of human struggle, but with the fine, pervasive desert dust, settling layer by quiet layer. It is the signature of a cessation of life that registered not as a catastrophe, but as an immediate, profound stillness. The collective historical signature of a massive, thriving metropolis simply dissolved into the warm air. This leaves the archaeologist to excavate not a tragedy, but a void where 50,000 stories ought to have been written in the earth. The silence of the City of Cinders is the silence of an unprecedented historical erasure. We jump forward 13 centuries, the trajectory of our investigation taking us to the Balkan frontier. We enter the dense, dark, evergreen forests that marked the northern reaches of the Roman Empire in the 2nd century CE. Here, we encounter a disappearance that confounds military historians and challenges the concept of state organization. This is the vanishing of the elite Roman 12th Legion, the Legio XII Fulminata, 20,000 men strong, in the year 117 CE. The Roman military machine was the apotheosis of organized documentation. Under the torch's glow, the scribe meticulously scratches figures into the wax, maintaining the detailed inventory crucial to Roman logistics. The 12th Legion was no mere auxiliary unit. It was a veteran force, highly trained and heavily equipped. They were recognized by the crimson of its standard banners and the sharp metallic flash of its polished Larica segmentata armor. Their winter campaign into the forested mountainous frontier was meticulously planned, designed to secure a newly defined border against persistent tribal incursions. Historical scrolls recovered from the provincial capitals document the preparations with painstaking detail. They record the massive logistical effort required for 20,000 men in a harsh winter environment. This included the weight of the grain stores, the number of forage teams accompanying the cohort, and the precise route planned through the frozen valleys and snow-laden pines. The documentation ceases only at the point where the Legion crossed a specific tributary, marking their entry into the deepest part of the primeval forest. The expectation was that the scrolls documenting their arrival at the forward base 3 weeks later would follow. They never did. The historical record that follows is characterized by a gaping void. Unlike a catastrophic military defeat, there would be survivors reporting the rout, prisoners captured by the enemy, or recovered legionary standards displayed as trophies. The absence was absolute. Subsequent imperial censuses, highly rigorous annual records designed to track military manpower, contain no death registries for the 12th Legion. There were 0 reports of captured soldiers, 0 recovered identifying artifacts. Most crucially, none of the prized sacred standard banners, the bronze eagles, and the specialized insignia that represented the soul of the Legion were ever accounted for. For the Roman state, a military loss of this magnitude would be a historical stain, a moment of profound record-keeping. Who died, how they died, who was responsible. In this case, there was only the bureaucratic equivalent of shrugging shoulders. The 20,000 men simply stopped existing in the official ledgers. The difficulty lies in the scale and the nature of the terrain. 20,000 men marching in formation represent a vast physical presence. Their movement requires the clearance of pathways, the construction of temporary camps, and the generation of massive amounts of military refuse. Discarded tools, broken carts, and the specific residue of a large, sustained human presence. Even a hasty abandonment would leave a trail of heavy Roman military gear, the unique iron spikes, caltrops, the hobnails from their boots embedded in frozen mud, the characteristic red ochre paint used on shields. The search expeditions launched the following spring found nothing. The forest seemed to have reset itself, the thick carpet of pine needles and snow entirely undisturbed by the passage of such a colossal force. The immense evergreen trees, dark and densely packed, seemed to have swallowed the metallic gleam and the deep crimson of the Roman banners entirely. The sheer logistics of making 20,000 organized, heavily armed individuals vanish simultaneously without leaving a single identifiable piece of military hardware behind suggests a physical mechanism far beyond conventional battle or natural disaster. The Roman historians who later chronicled the reign struggled with this anomaly. They could account for legions annihilated by Parthian arrows, or those massacred in Germanic ambushes, but this total disappearance was anomalous. It was as if the very earth opened up and consumed the organized military force whole, leaving behind only the silence of the ancient woods, where the sound of rhythmic marching and the clang of steel should have echoed. The 12th Legion is the vanishing act of an industrial-scale military machine, a perfect vacuum within the most meticulous state records of the ancient world. Our journey through historical disappearance now pivots sharply into the 20th century, trading the textures of granite, sand, and pine for the cold, sterile environment of concrete bunkers and complex electronic instruments. We turn to the 1957 Great Stillness, a global event documented solely by its negative signature, the simultaneous 7-hour disruption of the entire terrestrial radio spectrum. The mid-1950s were the height of global electronic vigilance. Communication centers, both military and civilian, monitored every frequency with obsessive diligence. Commercial aviation relied on constant radio contact, and military command structures utilized multiple overlapping bands for secure communication. The infrastructure was hardened and redundant, designed to withstand interference, whether atmospheric or adversarial. On a particular afternoon in late summer 1957, across the globe, communication technicians and radio operators experienced the exact same phenomenon. Not a burst of static, not a garbled message, and not the sharp cutoff associated with jamming or localized power failure. Instead, all carrier waves across a vast range of the electromagnetic spectrum, from very low-frequency VLF systems used by submarines to high-frequency HF bands used for transatlantic flight navigation, simply flatlined. The experience in the control rooms was one of instant, profound auditory deprivation. The usual ambient hum of carrier tones, the chatter of voices, and the rhythmic clicking of relays ceased. The silence was palpable, a physical weight settling over the glowing panels and humming vacuum tubes. Instruments, meticulously calibrated oscilloscopes and spectrum analyzers documented the event perfectly. They did not register a powerful interfering signal. They registered a total absence of transmission energy across the targeted bands. The stillness persisted for 7 hours and 2 minutes. Across continents, scientists initially suspected a massive, unprecedented solar flare, a coronal mass ejection capable of bombarding the Earth's atmosphere and overwhelming radio propagation. Yet, space weather observatories reported normal activity. Geologists examined seismic records. Nothing abnormal. Military intelligence immediately assumed an opponent had developed a revolutionary global electromagnetic pulse (EMP) weapon. Yet,
An EMP weapon leaves a distinct, measurable residual trace in power grids and electronic systems, a characteristic signature that was entirely absent in 1957.
The disruption was total. Commercial flights reported an unnerving sudden inability to reach ground control, forcing navigators to rely entirely on inertial and celestial guidance. Submarine fleets found their long-range VLF communication links simply gone. In concrete bunkers filled with sensitive monitoring equipment, the only sound was the clicking of technicians desperately attempting to troubleshoot systems that were not, in fact, broken. They were receiving no signal because, fundamentally, nothing was transmitting, or perhaps nothing was capable of receiving the transmission. Crucially, when the disruption ended, it was as abrupt as its commencement. The carrier waves simply returned, the global spectrum instantly populated again with the familiar static and chatter, often mid-sentence on certain automatic relays. The subsequent forensic analysis failed to identify a single traceable electromagnetic source for the event. There was no epicenter, no residual physical trace in the ionosphere, and no residual energy signature that could be linked to a known physical phenomenon. The Great Stillness is thus documented entirely by negative data, charts showing a perfect 7-hour dip in measurable radio energy, confirmed by thousands of independent measuring devices worldwide. It was an objective physical event. The instruments do not lie, yet the cause, the source, and the physical mechanism for silencing the global nervous system of communication remain entirely absent from the historical and scientific record. It is a historical anomaly proven by its own lack of signature. Finally, we turn to the most abstract, yet arguably the most intellectually devastating, vanishing act. The physical void discovered within the reconstructed archives of the ancient world. This vanishing is not of men or signals, but of knowledge itself, a specific collection of high-value scientific scrolls that ceased to be. Historical preservation is a painstaking act of salvage. The archives of antiquity, whether from Alexandria, Pergamon, or other great centers of learning, exist today often as fragments, recovered codices, and reconstructed catalogs. Through decades of meticulous work, scholars pieced together what was saved, restoring order to the remnants of intellectual empires. In one particular significant reconstruction project concerning a collection of Hellenistic-era scientific knowledge, the catalog was found to be incredibly detailed. These ancient librarians were meticulous, recording not just the title and author, but the physical dimensions, the condition of the papyrus or parchment, and even the precise shelf location of each work. The collection in question contained treatises related to advanced mathematics, theoretical physics, and non-Euclidean geometry, knowledge that was centuries ahead of its time. When the surviving catalog entries were compared against the physically recovered texts, a perfect historical absence emerged. A specific collection, designated by its sequential catalog numbers and described collectively as the Celestial Mechanics and Fluid Dynamics Corpus, was entirely physically missing. The reconstructed archive room offers the visual evidence of this void. The reclaimed wooden shelves, treated against insects and moisture, run along the cool, dry walls. Everywhere else, the shelves are populated by the dusty, brittle rolls of papyrus, their ends bound by faded linen tape. But at the designated location of the corpus, there is nothing. The shelf space is clean, defined by the fainter dust line where the heavy, tightly rolled scrolls should have rested. It is a precise, regimented gap, a physical vacuum in a library of reclaimed treasures. This absence is particularly troubling because it cannot be attributed to accidental loss or slow decay. The high-value nature of the scrolls means they would have been handled and copied frequently. They were foundational texts. If they had been destroyed by fire or war, evidence of their incineration or fragmentation would exist nearby. If they had been stolen, the theft would likely have occurred in pieces, leading to the gradual reappearance of fragments.
In black markets over subsequent centuries.
Instead, the loss was total and simultaneous.
It was a block of knowledge, a concentrated mass of advanced human understanding that simply winked out of existence at some unknown point in the past.
What vanished was not just paper, but a trajectory of intellectual development.
Imagine the scientific progress that relied on that specific knowledge set. The remaining catalog entries suggest theories that modern science only grasped after the Renaissance. The physical void on the shelf represents a perfect gap in the history of thought, a branch of human inquiry that suddenly terminated, leaving behind only the ghost of its inventory listing. These 5 events, the silent, immaculate abandonment of Point Delta, the quiet dissolution of the City of Cinders, the total erasure of the Roman 12th Legion, the causeless disruption of the Great Stillness, and the precise physical void in the ancient archives, are united by a singular characteristic. They are not mysteries born of insufficient data, but historical absences defined by the perfection of their lack of trace. They challenge the very principles of historical inquiry, demanding we consider not what mechanisms lead to residue, but what forces are capable of achieving absolute, instantaneous non-existence. They are the defining limits of our documented reality, perfect historical vacuums against which all our recorded knowledge is tested. They remind us that the meticulous record-keeping of civilization, no matter how exhaustive, still contains vast silent spaces, where entire realities simply ceased to be.